Everybody remembers what happened because you saw it on TV.
It started that talk about racism.
Sad, ashamed as well.
I really didn't want to be involved in the operation of the raids.
I was the law, I was part of the government.
My parents were too embarrassed to go to church because my brother and I were both in the police.
I couldn't believe that we were in the middle of real life situation like this.
That was a tragedy.
My name is Philapaina. My mother, she's Ngāpuhi, and my dad, he was from the village of Whaliatiu. 14 was when I knew what I wanted to be, and that was to be a police officer, and for me it was around serving community. So that's what I did.
Well, my name is Ellen Moriarty. I was born in Samoa, and family migrated to New Zealand back in '65 when I was 9.5. I always remember my dad always said, "Don't ever open the door to social welfare if they come knocking." Because you're not supposed to leave kids home alone.
My name is Michael Leslie Moriarty. My mother is Samoan and her father hails from the village of Siumu in Samoa. My Scottish father wasn't particularly animated with Samoan culture, loved Samoan singing, but kind of struggled with some of the cultural elements. But he tolerated it because of his love for mum. I joined the police in 1976. I was in the police for 20 years. I was fortunate enough to have a colourful career in various elements of the organisation.
Our iwi, our Asian liaison, our Southeast Asian, all our liaison officers, because we open doors for the police to walk into. And if that doesn't happen, you're not part of the community police. That's why it's so important, whether it be Māori, Pasifika. Yeah, we open doors for you fellas.
When I was about 11 or 12, I got caught shoplifting. Fortunately, the police officer that dealt with me took me home, and the way he spoke to my mum in particular was kind of, he saved me. He just impressed me with the care that he had and the concern that he had and the potential that he saw in me that he explained to mum.
Māori Pacific police officers, if you don't have them in an area like counties Manukau, Waitakere and Waitemata, Auckland City and counties Manukau, you're doing yourself a disservice, because we, along with the ethnic police officers, are part of the police that can open doors.
Yeah, so it was that time there's a real focus on increasing the number of Pasifika staff, and so that's how I got into the police, or I applied for the police. I said in my interview that I was Samoan, I could speak Samoan.
I was dedicated. It was almost like I had transformed, that I would like to kind of do that sort of work and be that sort of person that would, stand up and represent and speak for those who have a lesser voice or a less powerful position.
And so really in Auckland at that time, I think there was really only about 4 Pasifika women in the job. It was so minimal, the number of Pasifika police staff, especially police women. And police women as a whole, was a minority.
Teu le Va, my name is Tyrone Malaisa-Iri Lawrenson. I'm a New Zealand-born Samoan, currently living in Samoa itself. I joined the police on the 15th of January 1973. My father hails from the villages of Lufi and Lepea, and my mother hails from the village of Vaimoso.
My titles that I wish to carry at the moment is Patea, Vui, and my Christian name is Kelemete Vitale. A lot of my colleagues in the police know me as Mickey, that's short for Kilometre. I got posted to Wellington Central. There I did general duties and walked the beat, patrol cars. I worked in the operations room. If anything I want to highlight is the fact that I was mainly engaged with the community.
I was working as a labourer. At that time, my wife was pregnant, and I needed a more permanent job. And I came across a police officer in George Street in Dunedin. I asked him how much he was getting, because I was getting $2,781 a year. He said, "We don't get much, we get $4,666. I thought that's a lot more than I was getting.
Being in the police was good security, and it kind of protected me from being on the other side of the fence, so to speak.
The sergeant was one of those old police sergeants. He had a rolly cigarette in his mouth. He looked at me and he said, "What do you want?" I said, "I'd like to join the police." He said to me, "You look more like the Lone Ranger's sidekick than you do an applicant for the police." There were 6 of us that went at the same time, and he introduced each of these people, said, "This is so-and-so," and he forgot my name. And he said, "And this is Tonto," thinking back to the Lone Ranger's sidekick. And it's stuck with me ever since. Everybody thought that T for Tyrone was actually T for Tonto, so it's been my nickname for the last 50 years.
I was amongst the first in several different spaces within the police organisation in terms of special operations, being on the Armed Defender Squad, being on the Special Tactics Group. There weren't too many Pasifika involved in those.
I spent 3 years in Dunedin, and then I transferred to Auckland Central. They made me go undercover. Became a sergeant in 1980, where I was in charge of what was called the first ever beat section, doing the beats in Queen Street with 5 young constables. I was a senior sergeant in charge of 3 new sergeants and 15 constables. I was sent to the Royal New Zealand Police College to become the training administration officer and in charge of training throughout the entire country.
In the police in the 1970s, Pasifika didn't enjoy a great profile. I was aware of racism, and quite often some of the observations they made were quite racially based. However, I could actually understand and see that what they were looking at was through their Palangi eyes at something that was pretty horrible in any colour, you know.
So I do remember being out on patrol in ICARs. There was a fair bit of racism around in society, and certainly within the police. There was one time I remember I was in an ICAR with my partner, a male senior who'd been in a job a few years. We went up to K Road, and he rolled up the car and he rolled down the window. And he basically called out to a Polynesian male and he said, "Hey, bunga, come here." That sort of talk. Inwardly, I was really shocked. Hey, that behaviour is unacceptable. And, and it's an era too where your sergeants, your NCOs, they were like gods. If they tell you to do something or they tell you jump, you jump. You don't ask why, you ask how high. You jump. That was the thinking then. Yeah.
But I lamented the knowledge that there would be 10 times as many of those people in a church on Sunday morning who were doing the right thing and living a Christian life. And those ones there were the guys who were struggling. I had that, but my partner didn't necessarily have that vision.
I mean, certainly at that time, attitude towards police, there was a lot of respect towards the police. You didn't sort of push back or talk back or question anything. In some ways, I suppose police could sort of lord it over and say and do anything.
The Pasifika community that I'm most familiar with is the Samoan community. I think the impact was on several levels. The first level were the overstayers themselves. and how they became hunted, in that sense of being a prey to this colossal, powerful, established enforcement machine. So that must have been shocking for them, and that would have had repercussions.
If you did a pie graph, you would see that domestic violence was like 50%, 48% Auckland City, South Auckland. When you looked at the end of the day and the arrests or what, it seemed to be 90% arrested in South Auckland, 10% in Auckland. It was totally skewed in terms of how we probably dealt with the situation at that time. I think in terms of our Samoans, they were only too willing, because a police officer came into their house, they'd be very respectful and say, yes, I hit my wife because she didn't have my tea ready. And so therefore they got arrested, where when I listened to the communications, you'd hear things in Auckland City saying, the person told us to leave, so we did. So here in one case you had an arrest, in another case when we had a policy that said they must be arrested, the arrest never happened. So to me, although the results of the domestic violence was 50-50 roughly, the results of it were totally askew.
There's another dynamic within that. We call it here in New Zealand the unspoken majority. You know, the people that you don't hear from, that are lawful, that are law-abiding. And I think the policy decayed or eroded some of their mana towards the police, and some of their confidence in the police, and some of their trust in the police.
The police should have been more mindful and sensitive to how we were.
I think when you have a policy that is transparently unfair, you damage society and you fractionalise society. You break them apart.
Getting chased by immigration, by the police. He never ever spoke to us about what had happened, how he felt, because I didn't think Dad was an overstayer. But then knowing that he was, why wouldn't he talk to us about it and say, yeah, guess what? I was an overstayer. All good. How did you feel, Dad? You know, stuff like that. We could just share with him. I was told that there was a knock on the door, and it was, I think, the police this time, and he hopped out of the bathroom window to escape. So Mum said we just made sure he didn't get caught. Yeah. I think the shame of him being an overstayer and going through that and not telling any of his 6 boys. But yeah, I think that may be it.
When the Dawn raids occurred in the 1970s, the police had a sort of an interesting kind of conventional edit. I was really uncomfortable with that. Knowing that there was this ethical element to how the police conduct themselves, I wrote a report saying that I was uncomfortable with being involved in the duty, and the reason being that I could well inadvertently come across members of my own family, which would compromise them and compromise me. And so as a result of that, I really didn't want to be involved in the operation of the raids, and wasn't.
Everybody remembers what happened because you saw it, you know, on TV, where the police doing what they were doing and thinking, geez, you know, why is it only Pacific?
Because at the end of the day, the laws were created for everyone, despite the fact that they were focused on a few, prejudicially, and in my view, unfairly.
Don't target Pacific. Simple as that. Don't target Pacific, because even then, the Dawn raids, guess what ethnicity were the ones who were overstaying? That's the lesson. Don't target Pacific.
That was a tragedy.
In regards to the dawn raids operations themselves, those raids would have been done by males. So I don't think women actually played a huge part in the actual raids themselves, except I suppose, after to perhaps look after children if there were children that was impacted.
I wasn't involved directly in the dawn raids, but it did impact upon me because I would have to go on my father's instructions to pick up my sister, who was an usherette at the movie theatres in Queen Street. And she would finish at 11 o'clock at night. Now, she didn't have a licence and she didn't have a passport. Those were the two key documents that you could have been stopped for by the police during the dawn raids and been arrested without warrant. So my father would send me down to the theatre to pick her up and bring her home because I was a police officer and I had at least a police ID card. I was also concerned my parents were too embarrassed to go to church because the congregation did not like what the police were doing in terms of dawn raids, and my brother and I were both in the police, so they were caught between their loyalty to their sons and doing their job and how the congregation felt about the police.
There was a lot of Pasifika male staff, who I'd say, and who were heavily involved in community with churches and things like that. And I mean, even though there were Pasifika policewomen, we never really talked about it. We just got on with the job.
I was more concerned about what wasn't said. It's in the silence. It's when they're not actually talking about it. It's when they're just percolating kind of what's taking place, and that creates almost like an unspoken frustration or anger or mistrust.
I was mindful that the police were there to do a job. If there was any blame to be placed, it would be on the government of the time. My Samoan colleagues, they were helpless, they had a job to do. They were assigned on this section and they had to go. I was sad, ashamed as well. I was the law, I was part of the government. I couldn't believe that we were in the middle of real life situation like this. And here we are making these moves towards the immigrants.
If it taught us anything, it taught us to treat each other with far more respect, with far more dignity, and to limit the ignorant idea that somehow because people are different, they are less.
So I had become a little bit disillusioned with the way policing was going, and that they were moving away from being a community model, of service, and more into like corporate.
It takes years to build the trusts and the relationships. It only takes minutes to break it. The world isn't black and white. It's full of colours. I would rather now look for the goodness in a person than determine whether they are good or bad.
I sometimes feel what I've been through has been a calling. And 50 years later, my daughter graduates from the police college.
Hello, I'm Falinauti, my mama Anna Maria Vitali. She graduated from New Zealand Police College. I am now Constable Vitali.
I look at my community further out, and closer to me is my family. I wanted that to change, and I really believe that has changed.
My dad had a little frame of himself at home, and I've always wanted to become a police officer.
One of the things that I say to women and Pasifika staff is I think we always tend, because of our upbringing, not to stick our head above I want to encourage them to take up leadership roles. You know, I need to remind them that hey, you've got leadership skills and you can just as good as the inspector or the assistant commissioner or commissioner of police, and aim high.
We've got superintendents, we've got assistant commissioners, we've got inspectors. So my vision of seeing our Pacific Island people rise through the ranks, and not just through the ranks, but the different parts of the police is just great, just to be able to see them get to where they are now.
Hopefully people will say, oh yeah, I remember our Filipaina, he was community orientated and he just loved to help the community, but also to further Māori and Pacific police officers.
It's nice to talk about it. I'm proud of myself for what I achieved in the police, you know, and it put me in good stead.
That's the legacy, Pacific, whono, and now we're gone from the whono through to the Pacific networks in Tāmaki Makaurau. We got, you know, one in South Side and counties, and you know, one in Waitakere, and there's only 3 districts, but they're coming together as one.
I always look for what's similar. Where do we connect? Not where are we different? And I think there's some wisdom in that now.
Pasifika, yeah, we open doors for you fellas.